Stellion here for Hobby Game Dev, and I want to pass along today an important realization I had that I think was really useful in my development as a video game developer. This is actually something that happened a long time ago. My brother was a football player at Washington University, and at the time I was still in high school. We went out on a family trip over to St. Louis to see the team play, and I learned that the quarterback on the team, one of the star players of college football, had aced his ACTs and SATs, perfect scores on both standardized tests that are used as sort of the bar for getting into colleges. And this seemed novel to me, that someone could be both a star athlete of a very physically demanding sport and also achieving perfection in scoring on rigorous, difficult academic exams. Because in my mind, I'd always thought of when you got, it's like when you start out an RPG, right? Or even if you're doing character creation for, a wrestling game. And you've got points to allocate, and you could put them towards being a better warrior, towards strength or intelligence or charisma, if you want to be more like a wizard or a mage or a thief, or, agility or endurance or stamina, depending on, say, if it's a character game, character creation for a wrestling game, as opposed to an RPG. And they balance out. Everyone gets 100 points to allocate. And so in my mind, it was like, well, I was going to have to put them towards one thing or the other. But here's someone who, just as an example, I didn't even know him personally, I just knew of him. That was enough to really just click something in my brain that he had put in the time and effort and work and dedication to become skilled at football and to excel at it, and had put in the time and skill and work and dedication to also excel in his academics. And this impressed me. Because, at the time I was like, well, okay, I'm a programmer. In my mind, I had been programming for a little while. That's where my skills were being invested in. And, if somebody else would come along, I'd pass a book in the bookstore. I would hear a chance to hear some sort of talk. And I would filter it by, well, a programmer doesn't need to hear that. A programmer doesn't need to read that. I had already pigeonholed myself into I was going to become good at this one thing, this one narrow thing. I'd be a programmer. And that's just not a really productive way of thinking, right? Because if I put in the time and practice to become better at digital art, or audio manipulation for making sound effects or music, or level design, various types of design, systems design, scenario design, combat design, then I could be good at those other things too. So it's a bit like if someone's a skilled pianist because they put in a lot of time to practice piano. If they suddenly start taking up cooking on the side and they want to get better at cooking and they practice and they put in the time and they read about it and they get feedback and they try things in the kitchen for real, they don't suddenly become worse at piano because they're better at cooking. It's possible to develop skill in both these things if you put in the time for both. Real life doesn't work like these things where we all have 100 points to distribute. Some people are spending their time and energy mastering the skill of eating potato chips, and other people are spending their time and energy mastering an instrument or cooking, or in our case, hopefully video game development. But think about it this way too, because maybe that piano and cooking example isn't really applicable, because if someone's already good at cooking seafood, and I'm a vegan, so I'm not eating this stuff anyway, but it's just hypothetical, bear with me. If someone's really good at cooking seafood, could they also figure out, probably easier than someone else, how to cook steak well? How to cook Indian food or Greek food or Italian food well? I bet they probably could, right? Because they can carry a lot of those knowledge, a lot of that thinking, a lot of those concepts over, but they're comfortable with the tools in the kitchen. They're really good at eyeballing, sort of getting a sense of when this is ready and go to the next step, and when it's different stages of cooking and different, how much is a pinch? All those little questions that sort of maybe frees up some of the rest of us, they can transfer more easily. If someone already can play a piano, can they play a guitar easier? Well, they're still going to have to learn the chords and stuff, but they, can probably already read sheet music. They probably already have an ear for different tones. They already probably have a sense of tempo established from playing another instrument. It's sometimes easier, for example, if someone's already learned some other human languages, to learn more human languages because they've practiced that skill. Within a domain, it's actually easier. In the same way, if someone's a good athlete at one sport, could they become a pretty good athlete at another sport? I'm not going to say excellent if we look at Michael Jordan as an example, but they can certainly become very, very good at it because they've got those skills, they've got those habits, they've got their workflow, they've got their body in good shape. So as a game developer, we put our minds in certain shape, whether you're doing programming, design, art, audio, even production, and sort of leading, managing a small team of, collaborators. Those concepts can often transfer. If you first were really comfortable in Photoshop or Maya or Blender or GIMP and proficient in making digital art, will that help you become a game programmer? And I say it can, because it means you can better visualize your ideas. It means you can better mock up things. It means you can better prototype without having to wait for someone else to provide you art content, because you can unblock yourself and make your own art. means you can do this thing I'm always encouraging of making a screenshot to sort of mock up and working from that as your programming initial guideline, as your sort of design doc, if you will. In all these ways, I think it's really, really helpful to shift around within that space, to realize you don't have to pigeonhole yourself into one role. Now, the old adage is true. If you're looking for a AAA job, if you're trying to get a job at Activision or Electronic Arts or one of the many companies that get published through those kind of large-scale console producing game companies, it is imperative to be very, very skilled in one particular area. You will be hired not because you're a jack of all trades, but because you're a good programmer, good designer, good sound editor, or artist or whatever, with proper training or some sort of evidence that you're who they need with a skill in that category. But so if we look back at the time, a little bit of time I spent in Electronic Arts and corporate game development on Wii and Xbox 360 and whatever, it really helped. Even though I was technically there as a game designer, it really helped that I also had production ability and programming, and some sort of placeholder sound effects and functional art, because I was able to slam things out in terms of representing my ideas, prototyping my ideas quickly, without having to wait for other people, without it being bottlenecked, without having to get permission from a producer to get an artist's time or sound person's time or whatnot, just to make something to stand up the idea and put in front of a producer and say, how's this? I could execute my own ideas and put them out there because I was, I could add features to my level editor that I made to speed up my work or improve my ability to iterate or whatnot. In terms of programming, when authoring features, I was a technical game designer, so doing a little bit of both. When authoring features, I was able to author that content, not just do the programming to make the feature work, but tune the variables in such a way it showed off why this feature kind of works at a gameplay level, as opposed to abstractly, well, the system's in place, but I can't really tell if it's fun yet. I had a sense for how to do that because I put in the time for both those domains. It's worth deviating these ways also because it allows you to transfer your ways of thinking, right? Because if you, so maybe a good example for this. Sometimes I read, I think it was actually in the Cognition and Gaming book, was one of the things I recommended in my entry about cool books related to game development. There's an entry that mentions somewhere in there, and I apologize for the loose reference, that's the nature of a video blog, right? Mentions that it's useful when kids are learning to take on the role. So when they're in a science class, it's not just I'm a kid and I'm doing science. It's okay, I'm a scientist. I'm basically, mentally at least, I'm in a lab coat, because that helps us think about how would a scientist deal with this problem? What's a scientist process? What level of rigor does a scientist accept? And in my real life, as an adult, this certainly helps me in graduate school to think about, okay, well, I'm writing an academic paper. How does an academic have to approach this as opposed to, the kind of things when I'm writing on my blog, which are, as you heard from my reference, a little bit different. So it's useful to think of those roles, but especially because if you can switch between them, it's really invaluable. Because if you're comfortable with doing some design and some programming and some art, you can begin to mix and match, right? You can begin to, think about art as, well, how would a programmer approach art? And then if you've heard the idea of programmer art, you might think I'm sort of tongue-in-cheek about this, but I'm really not. I mean, look at a game like Elise by Steph Theron. It's a game where the art's all very programmatic. There's lots of lines and vectors and procedural animation of things going on in a way that if he wasn't a programmer doing the art, it would have come across looking extremely different. If you're doing design, you might think, well, how would an artist go about design, or how would a designer go about art? And if you know enough about either field, at least at a practical applied sense of how they apply to game production, those are very different processes, very different methods, very different criteria for what to advance on. You can wind up with interesting, weird, different kind of work. A lot of the work that I do in gameplay prototyping is thinking about programming not as a programmer, pure programmer would do it, but as a designer would program, or as an artist would program. That's part of where the name for the Interaction Artist series came from. Even though it's programming, it wasn't software engineering kind of stuff. It was programming with sort of an art mentality to it. So it's useful to learn these other roles. Like I said, there's benefits if within your domain. If someone's already a good student in social studies, they could probably become a good student in some other field as well, because they've got those study habits, because their mind's in a good place for it. And if you're already working on games, and you're working in an area like, say, level design or sound production or whatever, don't be afraid to deviate a bit into those sort of adjacent proximities to learn to unblock yourself. And this is what's great about, right, student, hobby, non-commercial, club, solo game development projects. You don't have that same pressure of, we need someone who's already great at it, because you can sort of pitch in and help out with little things on the side of it. I just want some experience making sounds. I just want some experience, trying out levels, even though before maybe I was a programmer. On Topple, the 2008 iPhone game that I worked on, the sound effects when the bricks touch each other, I needed a placeholder sound when doing the programming for that. And so I did just my finger in my mouth. I'd made sound effects for 18-ish Game Creation Society club games before that, so I was comfortable making just placeholder sounds and sort of editing and getting it to fit in there and whatever, getting the format I needed. And even though we had a real sound person tasked on that project, the publisher ultimately liked my placeholder mouth popping sound more than they liked the real sound person's sound for blocks connecting. And so it stayed. And so millions and millions of people have heard me going, because I was comfortable not just thinking I'm a programmer, I don't need to do that, or I'm a designer, I don't need to do that, I can wait for someone else to fill it in, but thinking I need a sound to test this, I'm going to make one, it's passable, it's not great, turned out to be great enough to work. So don't try to think too much in terms of only wearing one hat. It's really useful in small teams and working alone to be able to span between them. Becoming good at one thing doesn't make you any worse than the other. Don't be afraid to try out something new, to be bad at something for a while. I work with teenagers every weekend, helping them learn game development stuff, and sometimes they struggle with it. And part of what I tell them is that I think one of my most beneficial assets in life has been my shamelessness, my comfort with being really, really bad at something. Because you got to be bad at something for a while before you're going to be any good at it. And I think a lot of adults get wound up on being self-conscious about, I tried making sound effects, but they're so bad, or I tried making art, but it's so bad. And so they stop. They tell themselves that that's not for them. When if you stay comfortable doing it, and you just basically come to terms with the fact that whether or not you're any good at it, you're going to be doing it, you start gradually finding ways to get better at it. Now, by this point, I'm not a game artist in terms of the visual content, but I've done all of the art for games like Tour of Thor. I say all of it, I mean the UI and so on was helped, but it's sort of the world art, character art, animations, those sort of things. So it's really helpful way to think about it, to be comfortable being bad at something. I know for a lot of people early on, game development, that's it. But also if you're an intermediate, if you're even an advanced person in a single area, to branch out into a new one involves sort of starting from, okay, well, even though I'm really good at, art, sound, programming, and I'm maybe not so good at something else, being okay with that for a while, and still insisting on getting yourself some practice, getting some time in on that, because before you know it, you're good, fluent, comfortable at more than one, and that really, really empowers you to bring your own ideas into fruition without being bottlenecked by needing someone else's approval, someone else to collaborate, someone else who will gate, compromise, temper the ideas, which there's value in that. But if there is, make that because you chose to, not because you have to, and that's going to come from branching out. Chris for Hobby Game Dev. I really appreciate you tuning in. If you're not subscribed to my channel, I'm really making an effort to put together more and better videos. I don't know if you noticed, but I've been gradually sort of trying to up my production quality a little bit. I really appreciate you tuning in. Please subscribe. If you've got comments, let me know below. Thanks for tuning in. It's Chris for Hobby Game Dev.